Okay, so let's have a look at the amortization formula, which I've written out here. It's A is equal to P times I times 1 plus I to the power of T over 1 plus I to the power of T minus 1. In this particular formula here, we have an A. A is the annual repayment amount. So how much you're going to pay back at the end of each year. It's going to be the same amount at the end of each year that you're going to pay back to repay the loan. P is the sum borrowed, so P is going to be the amount that you've actually borrowed. It's called the principal. It can also be defined as the sum of the present values of all future repayments. So if you take all of these A's that you're going to pay back at the end of each year, find their present values, what they're worth today, add them up, they should equal the loan amount. I here is the interest rate as a decimal, and T is the time in years. We're going to talk about time periods of years here. So let's have a look at how we're going to do this. Remember your basic formula here, by the way, is it's just going to be A is going to be equal to P times 1 plus I to the power of T. This is our formula for working out the future value of some principal. So if we want to work out the present value of something, just divide across here by 1 plus I to the power of T. So in other words, P here is going to be equal to A over 1 plus I to the power of T. This is what we're going to use later on in this video. So our present value of any future repayments is going to be given by this formula here. So let's start. What I'm going to do first is draw some timelines. So let's say we'll do a few here. Let's say we'll do one here. Let's call this T1. Or sorry, we'll call it actually T0. This is T0. Let's call this one here T1. So this is going to be T1. Now we're going to pay a certain amount back A at this time. Let's do another one here. We'll call it T2. So this one is T2. So this is the end of the second year. We're going to pay a certain amount back there as well. Let's move on. You can do as many as you want in between here. We're just going to do these few. And then I'm going to do 2 out here at the end. The second last year, let's call it Tn minus 1. We're going to pay a certain amount back A there as well. And then finally, at the end of the last year, we'll call this Tn. And we're going to pay an amount A back there as well. Now, what we want to do here is find the present value of all of these A's out along here. Then add them up, and that should give us our loan amount. So if we take a look at the first one here, so we're going to pay back an amount A here. Let's find its present value. So the present value of this amount A, down here, is going to be given by P, let's call it P1, and that's going to be A over 1 plus I to the power of 1. That's its present value. This one here then, this A down here, what's its present value going to be? Well, let's take an arrow back here. Its present value, let's call it P2, is going to be A over 1 plus I to the power of 2, because we're looking at a 2-yearly period here, 1 year, 2 years here. You do that for each time period. So we don't know how many time periods. This is a general formula here, so I don't know how many time periods we're talking about. We're talking about n time periods, if you like. So let's move out to here. So to get the present value of this one here, I'm going to come back. There's a few in the middle here. So we'll call this Pn minus 1. That's going to be A over 1 plus I to the power of n minus 1. And finally out here at the end then, we're going to look at finding this present value of this amount down here. That's going to be Pn, and that's going to be A over 1 plus I to the power of n. Now, what we need to do is add all of these up, and that will give us our loan amount, our principal. So what I'm going to do here is add these up. That'll give us P, let's call it P when we add all these up, and that should give us our loan amount. Okay, so let's add them up then. P is our loan amount. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just add them up down here. So let's do that down here. Okay, so I'm going to call it, as I said earlier, I'm going to call it P. And it's going to be all of those present values added up. So the first one was a over 1 plus I to the power of 1. Second one was a over 1 plus I to the power of 2. And so on. There were a number in between as well. And out here then we had a over 1 plus I to the power of n minus 1. And finally we had an a over 1 plus I out here to the power of n. What I'm going to do next is, you can see in each term out along here, each of these terms out along here has an a, so I'm going to factorize that out. So I'm left inside here with 1 over 1 plus I plus 1 over 1 plus I squared, and so on. And then out here I've got 1 over 1 plus I to the power of n minus 1, plus finally then I've got 1 over 1 plus I to the power of n. Okay, so you can probably spot here that we have a geometric series within the square brackets. So let's deal with that. We have an a out here. We'll leave that till the end. And we have a geometric series in here. Now, I've dealt with geometric series in a previous video. You can have a look at that video if you're unsure about how to deal with them. But what we want to do is add up all of these terms. And to add up all of these terms, we look at this formula here. Sn is equal to a times 1 minus r to the power of n all over 1 minus r. In our particular case here, our a, our first term, is 1 over 1 plus I. Our common ratio, or, is also going to be 1 over 1 plus I. You can see here that if I multiply this by 1 over 1 plus I, 1 times 1 will give me the 1 up here. 1 plus I times 1 plus I will give me 1 plus I squared, and so on all the way out along here. So that's our or. Our number of terms here, the number of terms here is going to be t. We've got t number of terms, because you can see back up here, we have t number of terms here. So n is going to be just t here. So let's just put these values into our formula. So we have a, which is 1 over 1 plus I. That's our a. Then we've got 1 minus or, so that's going to be 1 minus 1 over 1 plus I. That's our 1 minus or. We need to raise the or to the power of n, in this case t. Then that's all going to be over 1 minus or, which is 1 over 1 plus I. So that's what we get when we add up all of these terms up here. We just stick the a, the or, and the n in here. So now we've just got to deal with this here. This is going to be our p here. So let's just deal with what's inside the square brackets first. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is just multiply out this bracket. I'm going to multiply this term by the 1 and this term by this here. Now, just looking inside the bracket and inside this bracket here, you've got I'll just do it in a different color here, you've got a 1 over 1 plus I to the power of t. That's really 1 to the power, that's this 1 to the power of t is just going to be 1. And 1 plus I to the power of t is going to be 1 plus I to the power of t. So that's what this part here to the power of t will become. So if I multiply this by this here, I'll get, so in other words, if I do this, what will I just do that here? If I take that 1 over 1 plus I to the power of t, multiply that by 1 over 1 plus I, you can see what you get here is multiply the top by the top, you'll get 1. If I multiply the two denominators here, I've got 1 plus I to the power of t multiplied by 1 plus I to the power of 1. So we just get 1 plus I to the power of t plus 1. Because you add the two powers. The rules of indices here, you add the two powers. So t plus 1 gives us t plus 1. Okay, so let's do that up here anyway. So this here times 1 is just going to give us 1 over 1 plus I minus. Now I've already done it over here, so I should end up with 1 over 1 plus I to the power of t plus 1. So that's our numerator done. So let's look at our denominator now. We have two fractions here, 1 over 1 minus 1 over 1 plus I, so I'm just going to add those two. So I'm going to take the 1 plus I as the common denominator. So I need a 1 plus I up here as well. So in other words, 1 becomes 1 plus I, so multiply the top by 1 plus I, I get 1 plus I up here. Minus here, the minus here, which is this minus, this minus here. This minus here is this minus here. And now I've got to just put a 1 in here because 1 plus I into 1 plus I is 1. 1 times 1 is just 1. Okay, so that's the next step. Okay, so let's just move it on up here a little bit and do the next line. So we have P on this side, we have A here, and let's continue on. So the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to just do the two fractions at the top, two fractions up here. I'm going to add these two fractions here. So to add them here, you can see you've got a common denominator here of this, 1 plus I to the power of t plus 1. So let's do that. So I'm going to take our two fractions on the top. Common denominator is 1 plus I to the power of t plus 1. Now, what do I need to do to this 1 plus I to turn it into this here? I need to multiply it by 1 plus I to the power of t. 1 plus I to the power of t. I'll just do that over here for you. So 1 plus I, what would I need to multiply that by? What would I need to multiply this by to give me this? Well, if I multiply that by 1 plus I to the power of t, here I've got a 1 plus I to the power of 1, here I've got a 1 plus I to the power of t. That will give me 1 plus I to the power of t, 1 plus I to the power of t plus 1. Again, add the two powers. So what I need to do is multiply the top by 1 plus I to the power of t. So 1 plus I to the power of t times 1 is just 1 plus I to the power of t. Okay, now we've got to subtract. What do I need to do to this to give me this? Well, just multiply it by 1, so multiply the top by 1, and that will just give me 1 here. Okay, so that's the top two fractions added. What about the bottom fraction then? Well, the only thing I can do with that here is I've got a plus 1 here, I've got a minus 1 here, so I'm just going to subtract those. So I end up with an I on the top, and I end up with 1 plus I on the bottom. So that's it, that's the next step. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is divide this fraction at the top here by this fraction on the bottom. So the way you do that is you just take this fraction on the bottom, flip it upside down, and multiply. So this I here will end up here, and the I plus 1 here will end up multiplying the numerator of this fraction here. So let's do that. Okay, so I'm going to end up with the I plus 1. No, sorry, what I'm going to end up with is the 1 plus I multiplied by 1 plus I to the power of t minus 1. So that's the denominator here multiplied by the numerator up here, because I'm flipping this fraction upside down and multiplying. Okay, on the bottom then, I end up with this I here, because it's flipped upside down, this fraction is flipped upside down, this I here will end up multiplying by this denominator here. So I end up here with I times 1 plus I to the power of t plus 1. Okay, so what I'm going to do next here is divide the top and the bottom, the numerator and the denominator here, by 1 plus I. So I'm going to divide the top and the bottom by 1 plus I. So let's have a look at what happens when you do that. Okay, so we have P here is equal to A times. Now, if we divide the numerator here by 1 plus I, this 1 plus I here will disappear. We'll just get 1. 1 plus I divided by 1 plus I is just 1. So really on the top we end up with 1 plus I to the power of t minus 1. Now the denominator here, we have an I times 1 plus I to the power of t plus 1. Now remember that 1 plus I to the power of t plus 1. 1 plus I to the power of t plus 1 is just 1 plus I times 1 plus I to the power of t. They're the same thing. You just add the two powers here as we did earlier. So if I divide this by 1 plus I, this 1 plus I will disappear, and cancel if you like, and we'll just end up with 1 plus I to the power of t. So what we'll end up with on the bottom is I times 1 plus I to the power of t. Okay, so let's just finish this off then. Finally then, what I'm going to do here is remember what we want here. What we want to end up with here is A. We want to end up with A on its own here. We want to know what the annual repayments are going to be. So what I need to do is divide by this entire thing here. So I've got to bring this over to this side here. Because it's a fraction, if I divide by this fraction, what I need to do is flip it upside down and multiply by P. So finally then what I end up with is A is equal to P times. So I'm going to just turn this upside down and multiply. So it's I times 1 plus I to the power of t divided by 1 plus I to the power of t minus 1. And that's it. That's the formula that we needed to derive